At Making Medicine, we're reporting on the headlines, not making medical recommendations. For personal health questions, always consult a doctor. Nothing in this episode constitutes investment, financial, or legal advice, and please consult your own advisors before making decisions. All right, well, I couldn't be more thrilled about how we're ending this conversation. And just like Kirsten said, we'll leave a couple minutes at the end before we wrap at 10:30. So if you have any questions, we've got a pretty good geographic representation here. I'm going to steal Kirsten's playbook and let everyone introduce themselves, but two state bio CEOs and someone at the very forefront of China on behalf of Congress. So maybe I'll start at the end. Tim, quick bio and what you're up to with Biocom.
Sure. Tim Scott, CEO of Biocom, California trade organization. I've been a biotech entrepreneur for 25 years and just took over this role in the last year or so. And I just would add to that there are birds in this world and there are frogs. And I like the way you organized the panels today, because at the very beginning we had the birds, and they're flying at the absolute highest level with a great perspective on geopolitics and the effects. And so they're at 30,000 feet, and then the next panel, the investors were down around 20,000 feet, still a very broad perspective, but focused on the industry. And I'm a frog on Earth in the mud, dealing with those issues that we deal with every day. And I was happy to hear the senator say that that Washington, D.C. wants to hear from the frogs, and we're willing to talk to them and tell our stories.
Michelle, you are not a frog.
I was going to say, I don't know what animal that makes me, but I'm Michelle Rozo. I'm Vice Chair of the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology. We are a legislative advisory group. We're made up of a bipartisan and bicameral group of elected officials. Senator Todd Young is our chair. I'm our vice chair. And then we have former government officials, industry executives, academics. And with that makeup, we, over the last 2 years, reviewed the state of play in U.S. biotech vis-a-vis our strategic competitors, namely in China, and came out with legislative recommendations, a playbook for Congress. So I'm coming here from Washington, D.C. And yeah, again, I don't know what animal that fits into your metaphor, but somewhere in the ecosystem.
And I'm Laura Gunter. I run the North Carolina Life Sciences Organization, so much like Tim, but sitting in North Carolina. And I guess in the analogy, then suddenly I'm a frog too, but we are the ones in the trenches. We are the ones that have been traditionally talking to both our state legislatures as well as our federal delegations, bringing these stories. And as was noted earlier, it really is impactful when it's not just me showing up, but I'm bringing that small company or large company CEO or boots on the ground plant manager or whoever that may be to really provide real stories. Like, this is real impact. It does make a tremendous difference, and obviously we've seen there's a big time of need right now. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I might say this is the nitty-gritty panel. This is the people who are in the details, both of you on behalf of your states. Michelle, I want to start with you, though, because unless you're really in the weeds like us at Incubate, folks may not be aware that there's this legislative commission, but I would say also a really successful legislative commission, because a number of your recommendations didn't just go off into the ether, they are now law. Can you talk a little bit about some of those recommendations and what we saw in the defense bill and how you're thinking about your work?
Happy to do so, and thank you for recognizing that. I think in Congress and its wisdom enabled us to have time after our report was launched in April, and you please check it out. It's at biotech.senate.gov to continue our work for another 18 months. So we have authorization through the end of the year, and that is really to work on implementation, to getting these recommendations. They don't just sit on a shelf once we release the report, but actually work on getting them moving through Congress, passed into law. And as you mentioned, half of our 49 recommendations have already been implemented. for those policy wonks, the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDA, is, a moving vehicle. It passes with some regularity, usually every year. And because of that, those recommendations that could fit neatly within the Defense Department, things like DoD making biotech a strategic priority, having senior officials at the department who have biotech under their purview, a manufacturing fund, ways to create market certainty for products of biotech by the department coming out with advanced market commitments, workforce training, data and AI, so on and so forth. Those that could ride neatly within the Defense Department have moved and are passed into law, but we still have, half of the recommendations that need to have additional advocacy. Some have been introduced, some still need to be introduced, and that's really the focus of our year left, is to serve, as that support to Washington, to Congress, to continue to work with members and their staff, to educate, to bring companies and folks like those in the room to really talk about what biotech is and what it can be. So that's what we have left on our clock.
This is a tough question, so follow me through here. A lot of those proposals, many of them now law, seem to be built on the concept that we want the U.S. to be the crown jewel of a global biopharma ecosystem. And the commission came up with, here are a number of steps. Here's that playbook you could do. Lauren, Tim, both of your organizations have flagged concerns, heavy concerns, with MFN, price controls, the IRA's price controls, because let's not forget that MFN is up here. Underneath MFN is still the price control mechanisms put in place by the Inflation Reduction Act, both of which your organizations. How do you two reconcile, we want to be number one, but what are the consequences in your two states of embracing price controls? I'd be curious, Laura, I know you've spoken out on some of the MFN and IRA stuff. What do price controls do, and how does that enable Michelle and her colleagues' goals of keeping America in a leadership position?
Right. I think, interestingly, back to the previous conversation and the note that, big pharma's not necessarily being as impacted, but where we're really seeing the impacts of MFN and price controls is on the small, innovative companies. Again, for the very reason why we're sitting here, because investment gets stifled, or there's concern, is there an end game, to this? Large companies are pulling back from partnering because they have less dollars themselves maybe to spend. So that's where, when we're trying to be innovative on the biotech front, and not just biopharma, but really more broadly around biotechnology in general, because there's pieces that obviously are defense related and hit more of an industrial side piece of biotechnology. But regardless, all of that early investment from the private sector has been limited, and there's, again, that uncertainty. Back to the uncertainty, and then hopefully following Senator Burr and trying to find the opportunity, but it's not always clear where that opportunity is. And so I think that's the biggest kind of disconnect between the two. On the one hand, yes, we want to recognize that we want to be the most powerful biotech, nation in the world. But on the flip side, we need those early stage dollars and certainty to do that.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And the thing that I would add is that, we have 1,800 members in California. The top 10% care about pricing, they care about tariffs, they care about the cuts throughout HHS, and we align really nicely with bio and with pharma on those issues. The bottom 90% don't think about it too much because they have other issues that they're worried about. And so they are thinking about, should I be working with China at this point? I've heard that there could be policy about it. What should I be doing about it? And so, we're taking a group to China in April. And ahead of that, we're preparing them by looking at what their agenda should be, what should be their plan of attack and engagement with Chinese organizations, because most people think, I don't even know what to do when I get over there. So we help them plan to think about what types of programs would you be interested in licensing? What is it that your board would want you to understand better about this? And on the opposite, what type of work would you take over there, and how can we help you engage with both preclinical and clinical service providers over there so that you really understand better how China can be helpful to you, but also, we are competing with China, and at the highest level, the government needs to make an investment in the industry through the form of NIH funding and SBIR, TTR funding in order to be competitive with China. We used to own the shipping industry and the shipping routes. We decided that we didn't want to do that anymore in the 80s, and China now manufactures 90% of the ships, the ship cargo containers, and the trucks that carry them. We decided to get out of that business. The same is true with chips, except now we want to get back into the chips business, so we did the $4 billion CHIPS Act, which doesn't really buy our way back in because that gets us maybe 4 plants. Meanwhile, China and Taiwan are both building 10 new plants. So it has to be a sustained investment if we want to continue to be competitive in biotechnology. And right now, I'd say we are the leader, but it's slipping very quickly because that support is waning.
Michelle, I want to come back to you because in your conversations that led up to the report and talking people through it and then getting them to act on it, I think the first question is, how were you so successful building consensus around these? Because I think that as an industry, large and small, and I want to come back to that disconnect between large and small, as an industry, we don't always get our agenda pushed forward. How were you able to coalesce bipartisan support? Do you just have to say the word China and everybody says, give me a playbook? Or how did you navigate this?
Well, I think Tim said it really nicely. This is an industry where we've seen this history of the U.S. offshoring critical industries, and we've seen what has happened, whether it's ships or chips, to try to pay our way back in, and the difficulties in doing that. The message, I think, is simple in this area, is that biotech, we have the opportunity, we have been in the lead in this technology. We need to act now to maintain our lead, to sustain it, but we still have the opportunity to act while we have the lead. We don't have to try to fight our way back in. And so that message resonates really well. I think it's also that biotech is a platform technology, like AI, like chips. It is biopharma, but as Laura mentioned, it's bioindustry, it's bioag, it's energy, it's defense and national security. It really increasingly is and will touch every sector of the economy. So that's jobs, that's economic growth back home, things that members of Congress really care about. And so altogether, that imperative to act now so that we can continue to have and enjoy the benefits of biotechnology here in the United States is I think, a winning message.
Tim, Laura, I want to do a deeper dive into the states. What is the mood in California, Tim, in terms of seizing leadership in 2026? And how are you appreciated by your state government as the ecosystem? I mean, we're sitting here, so things are going somewhat all right.
Yeah, it's interesting because the life science economy produces about $400 billion of economic output in California, second only to the tech sector. And they're kind of merging, right? There's a big convergence that's going on there. And yet the governor is not super supportive of the industry. I think he's kind of taken a arm's length approach to the industry, perhaps because of drug pricing, whatever the reason is. And yet at the same time, there's a number of programs in California that are very supportive of the industry. And that the industry utilizes. So CERM is a perfect example of the regenerative medicine. $8.5 billion has been put into that for stem cell and cell therapies. And that's very helpful to the industry and to kicking off a lot of new programs. In terms of workforce development, there's a Jobs First program. As we all know, biotech jobs are high-paying jobs. It's the exact kind of thing that politicians love to see in their state. So we're very engaged at that level as well. And a number of other programs that are ancillary, but are things that we take advantage of. So there is engagement, but we need to go out and make it happen.
Yeah, and I think, in North Carolina, we have, I think a pretty supportive environment. They see the value, certainly from an economic perspective. I will say we've had a lot of, and some of you probably know this from, seeing announcements on the manufacturing front, and that is a tremendous economic boon to the state, obviously. And so we've had a long focus on the industry. I think we're probably a little bit of a product of our now success, because there's kind of, again, still in that innovation sector, it's hard. We have some things that support the small side, but it continues to be a conversation to remind them that we're not necessarily going to continue unless we start to, again, address the fact that, yes, we're doing well, but for, and again, whether it's at the state or federal level, we need to sort of maintain and be continuing to invest. And I think that's sometimes the conversation that needs to be had. It's hard to tell them that somehow we're not doing well, because that's not necessarily what it looks like on paper. But the reality is, if we're not doing the things around the commission report, we're going to be seriously compromised, not just as a state, but as a nation.
I have a few in the hopper, but any questions from the audience? I think we do actually have a mic this time around, so be thinking. Oh, yeah, a few in the back. I don't think I can throw it quite that far. Kirsten will run it back.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So I lead the R&D data and AI for Accenture across UK and Ireland. And we work with quite a large number of multinational corporations in pharmaceuticals. And actually, I can see it from both sides. The problem that we're having, obviously, is that overnight, as the DOJ kicked in within the multinational corporations, the China employees that are part of this company was cut off the global systems. And so we ended up with a lot of business as Accenture to try to resolve some of this. But the problem that we're struggling with is where is this all going to end? And is there going to be a path by which we try to make the measures a bit more easier for the multinational corporations, do we think? Or we're going to end up with the multinational corporations, China working for China, and then the global or the US is working for the US. Because at the end of the day, it's actually hurting the US headquarters, the US companies that are based in the US, because usually it's China working for them and they're working for China to try to sell the drugs over there. So whatever has happened has actually disrupted that flow, and it's starting to become a bit less and less collaboration over time.
I'm going to restate where, maybe Michelle, start with you. Where does it all end? I think, thank you for the question, and what you just said is what's on paper and what's real. There is a disconnect here, and I want to explore that a little bit. And so, Michelle, where do you see this all ending?
Well, maybe even stepping back further of where it needs to begin is I think we made a number of recommendations, totaled $15 billion in investment that we think needs to happen on behalf of the U.S. government. But I think the main recommendation we made and our observation after reviewing the U.S. versus competitors like China is that we have failed thus far to make biotech a strategic priority at the highest level of the U.S. government. And really making U.S. competitiveness and U.S. leadership in biotech a strategic priority. And what that means is there isn't someone looking out for how all of the policies and decisions may impact the biotech sector and advocating for that inside the government. And so, whether it's trade or tariffs and manufacturing jobs, some of these decisions that was just highlighted, how that impacts the biotech sector needs to be considered, and how that impacts U.S. leadership. We heard in the last panel about China's innovative ecosystem. Well, that was built off of 20 years of strategic prioritization of this ecosystem and doctrine and policies, priorities, investments, regulatory change to make biotech a leading sector in that country. We have not yet done the same, and this is our opportunity now. I think everything flows from that, is making biotech and our leadership a strategic priority.
When you were having those conversations, and I think this gets to some point, your point about multinational corporations, are those viewed as a strategic asset? Because in my day-to-day with members of Congress, it's love small biotech. How do we champion them? Let's do a carve-out on this price control bill for them. We're really going after the big guys. And I think everyone in this room knows, well, the big players are the ones that get the drug to the patient. They acquire the small. It's a very virtuous cycle. But in DC, there's this disconnect. And if you ask me, as an outside observer of China, one of the things that is holding them back is a truly global multinational that could market their innovative products. But when I talk with members on the Hill that care a lot about this work, I don't know that they look at our global multinationals headquartered in Boston or North Carolina or California as a strategic asset. Did that come up in your work?
But I think it's also that we don't look at biotech as a complete ecosystem, right? Because we have small biotech, we have multinational pharmaceutical companies, we also have ag biotech and industrial biotech, and all of those communities aren't speaking from the same sheet of music. And so, but there is a lot of similarities, right? If we can make biotech cheaper, faster, easier to do in this country, it helps all of those sectors, all of those companies. And that's where we came down on the commission, was how do we make sure that we do that? And we're not just looking at one part of the elephant, but really seeing this entire sector, this entire technology as a critical technology. That's what the Chinese have done, is really looking at biotech holistically. And now they have strategies for pharmaceuticals, for industrial biotech, for brain-computer interfaces, really all of these offshoots of maintaining, a really healthy, strong life sciences and biotech ecosystem.
Let me just add something to that. I mean, solving unmet medical needs is a worldwide problem. It's not something that just one country figures out. And so we need to be supportive of each other. We need to work with other economies. And it's part of our own doing that APIs and ingredients for devices and drugs are made all over the world. It's our own doing that now preclinical is done really, really well in China, and that clinical trials are done really, really well. So we need to keep that in mind as we're also trying to become competitive. And that one of the areas that we're focused on in terms of becoming more competitive is that first-in-human studies in China can be done very inexpensively now. You can get there for $20 million, and in the US it's more like $50 million. But we can be more competitive in that area. And there's good reason why biotech and pharma companies will want us to be competitive, because their first-in-human trial in China has to be redone once it's brought to the US, right? You can't take that same data and submit it to the FDA. So why can't we find better ways to do first-in-human at university level with a full-service unit? And this is what we're investigating with the 5 cancer centers that make up the UC, is why can't we do that and work with NCI and perhaps get a little bit of money to be able to do really fast and inexpensive first-in-human trials to be able to get that data, kill drugs sooner, because that's where we get to real benefit.
Yeah. And that's that time and money, time is money factor. If you can get first-in-human data and know you have a viable therapeutic, then you can come back and get the money here and do this. But we've got to do on the regulatory side and speed. It's all about that timing and speed.
I know I saw a couple more hands up, so I do what? Yeah, in the back, Kirsten, you got to run again. I'm sorry. If you wouldn't mind identifying yourself.
Sure. Thanks. Rob Coloring. I'm with a family office. My question is on the investment side. As part of de-risking some of these strategies and ideas and just some of the things you guys are talking from the policy side, are you seeing more milestone or equity being taken back instead of cash? Can you speak to that?
I keep turning this off. I want to drag some of the investors back on stage. I don't know if you all have thoughts on if in your own day-to-day you're seeing more milestone or equity transactions in your day-to-day. That may be a better question for some of the investors on the previous panel, but anyone want to take a shot at it?
I mean, I can comment broadly to some of the additional recommendations we made in the investment space, recognizing that as we talked about earlier, biotech kind of still takes too long, is too expensive to get from the lab to market into patients' hands, and how can the government help to sort of defray that cost, make more certainty, reduce risk. And so one of the recommendations we made that was recently introduced in the House was to create an independent investment fund seeded with $1 billion that would be used to invest in critical technology areas with an emphasis on biotechnology, helping support things like platform technologies in biotech, elements of this ecosystem that sometimes are harder to fund with traditional venture dollars, be that sort of stable patient capital. So we were pleased to see that introduced in the House. And again, if you look at biotech.senate.gov, you can see the tracker, the legislative numbers that can help, when you come to Washington, like we've talked about already today, to talk to your members of Congress about ideas that you may be interested in.
Yeah, and this is maybe less the investment venture side, but back to Tim's earlier mention about the SBIR and STTR reauthorization, critically important because again, those are really impactful federal dollars. There's been a program in place. It's the seed fund for innovation, across sectors, not just biotechnology, but clearly biotechnology is it's a great place for small companies to start. So important to have that program reauthorized. I mean, that's just one of the pillars of research across the country. Same with NIH funding. Again, we, as the U.S., have sort of traditionally set up, looking at institutions and universities across the country, knowing that there's, again, talent and smart people all across the country, really all across the globe. We see collaborations with all kinds of things. Think about mRNA technology and the whole vaccines, but I mean, it started well before that and was, collaborated across the world. And we need to continue those sorts of things so that early stage research, figure out what overhead and different things look like. But those sorts of really base level that we'd been doing, we need to be increasing that, not taking that away. And that really ties right back into the commission's work.
This industry requires stability because it's a high-risk industry, and we require stability from a regulatory perspective and also from a financial perspective. And over the course of the last year, with all of the concerns, it wasn't surprising that our VC friends hit the pause button. Interest rates were up. There were issues about tariffs and pricing, and 10,000 people were fired from HHS. And through all of this, it would make sense for a smart investor to pause. But you take into consideration with that the fact that the IPO market was also closed for most of the year. M&A is what saved us, and that's because we had this $350 billion patent cliff that large pharma was looking at and saying, we got to do deals. And so the M&A activity far outgained IPOs and private investment by a lot, and way more than previous years. We need to reverse that to be able to have a healthy environment. And instability at NIH funding and SBIR, STTR funding is a part of that, because that's the catalyst that starts the whole thing moving. And as a small biotech entrepreneur, I would license something from the university. The only way to get across the valley of death was through SBIR. And the only way I would get VC investment is if I got across the valley of death. And so that's why that is so critical and why it's so important that by the end of this month, we need this to be reauthorized.
Well, let's like to end these things on an optimistic and positive note. And our policy director, John Guy, if he were up here, he could give the good news update. We've been told there's a breakthrough on SBIR. So you heard it here first. It'll be turned back on. They figured out their differences. It'll be a big year. These topics will come up. I think it's important that everyone stays on top of policy this year. To that end, in the subject of innovation, we have a QR code, and that QR code will take you to Incubate's resources on policy on things like MFN. As Kirsten's panel pointed out, there's good and there's bad. We have to clearly say that price controls in the US market would have a devastating blow to the ecosystem, that weakening IP would have a devastating blow to the ecosystem. while simultaneously, let's take advantage of an FDA that is open to new ideas when it comes to AI. And if we do everything right, we'll end up in a competitive place with China, with patients ultimately benefiting. So we will leave it there. Thank you all for being here. Good luck in all your meetings, and a round of applause for this incredible panel.